the Two Guys, One Shaker Cup podcast, hosted by Joshua Shaw and Ryan Buckeye.
All right, everybody, welcome back into another episode of Two Guys, One Shaker Cup. Ryan Buckeye, Joshua Shaw back with a topic today that's not necessarily, I wouldn't say it's not in our wheelhouse because you and I we're men. This is what men are supposed to do. Drink beer, have a remote in our hands, and watch professional sports on television. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Professional sports as it sits today. But you had a great idea. It's like, Ryan, what does sports look like in 25 years? What organizations are left around? Like, what the dynamic of sports and the how we consume it, is it going to change? So this is a topic I'm stoked about, man, because you're an Ohio boy, so I'm assuming, I don't know if you're a Buckeye fan in terms of college football. If you are, we're going to end this conversation right now. But it's you and I actually never really talked sports before, so now we get a chance to sit back and actually get our masculinity back and act like men for once on this podcast.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is our job as men to talk about this subject matter. I think it's though we could probably jam about a lot of current stuff and whatever, but I think it's also fun for us to think about, like, what is going to happen when we're just old farts, and are we going to still be able to enjoy sports the way we used to, or is it going to look completely different? Like, are we not even going to be able to just think about it in the context of today? Is it going to be some close iteration? I don't know. I mean,
right.
That's a conversation I hope we have, because I think it's just a fun thing to think about. It's just, it's one of those things that I think anybody listening to this maybe have been sitting around drinking some beers with their boys and thought about it as well. So
it's interesting. Yeah, first off, when you say when we're old farts, like, you're an old fart when you start using the word old fart, Josh. So you have officially crossed that line into adulthood.
I accept that I'm an old fart.
Yeah. It's interesting because for me, I grew up watching sports, loving sports. Like, every kid has this goal of being a professional football player, professional baseball player, whatever it might be. Most of people listening to this podcast probably participated in some sort of sporting event. And then when they left that sporting event, they probably cried and had a hard time with it. Sports, even in 2019, are completely different today than they were 10 years ago for us. I mean, I look at using the NFL as an example, because that's probably the biggest monkey in the entire room. You talk National Football League and how that organization in itself over the last just 3 to 5 years has drastically changed in terms of their rules. And now the entertainment value of that is less and less. Than you had the national anthem protesting thing, which turned a bunch of people off. But more importantly, I think about, like, high school organizations here in Minnesota, and it's not nearly as much as in Texas, because Texas, like, football is life. But Minnesota, the recruitment and the participation in tackle football at the high school level is down dramatically. And I think that's representative of across the nation, with parents not allowing their kids to play contact sports like football because of the head injuries and everything else that we've learned. So I'll start with the NFL. I'm going to make a bold statement. Like, in 25 years, I don't know if the NFL is going to be around anymore, Josh. I don't know if, at least the NFL that we know today, may no longer exist in 25 years. And I think that would be the one sport, even if there's financial struggles amongst, like, the MLS or whatever it might be, football is just, it's hurting. The ratings show it's hurting. The participation is showing it's hurting. So give it 25 years, unless they can make that sport and they wear bumper pads, I don't know if it sticks around.
Yeah, I mean, I think it can go in one of two ways. Like you said, I mean, it could become extremely kind of safe, and, the perception from society wants it to be, flag football or two-hand touch. I kind of even think about it maybe in the opposite direction, probably, more extreme maybe. Maybe there's this level where we finally got to the point where we go, okay, they know the risks, they know what's going on, and maybe we just go right back to it, and we just let everything kind of happen, kind of more towards the extreme level, let the players be enhanced, kind of just go at it and say, hey, if you want to sign up for this and this is the way you want to make money, there's some repercussions that are going to come with it. If you're not into that, there's a lot of other options for you. And I think that's where people are at now, is that you're seeing youth rates go down. You're seeing that kind of finally start to trickle into some of the higher ones where it's high school or college, or now even pro level. You have guys retiring after a year or two. It's just it's kind of crazy that it's happened so quickly. And I don't want to be that guy that is kind of glossing over that there is some real kind of risks that happen with the way that the game is played today, and with head injuries and things like that. I'll say from a product standpoint, if I'm just a consumer of the product, it's not as enjoyable as it was when you had guys like Ronnie Lott or Sean Taylor, like throwing their bodies at people and just blasting them coming down the middle while they're catching a pass. Now it's kind of like, hey, where do I hit this guy? What do I do? It's not as enjoyable because you could see it happening and you're like it's not as, I don't know. I just don't know if it's gonna stick around that way. It either goes away, it just kind of crumbles because it just becomes too soft for people, or somebody decides, hey, let's go the total opposite direction and just let's go crazy with it.
Yeah, and you think about that flip side, and I know we're spending time on football, but I think that's obviously the most consumed sport in America, and that's probably most of our listening audience. But then you take like the XFL from several years ago when Vince McMahon from WWE tried to start this extreme football organization. The problem with when you have extreme and people understand the risks, and now we allow them to be enhanced, is these athletes who actually have athletic skills may be choosing to pursue other sports instead of a sport that's this extreme. So now you're getting subpar athletes that do an extreme football that the product on the field might also suffer because it's just not as good talent-wise. Sure, the hits are there. Sure, the contact's there. People love that. But if the product, like the XFL, the product was terrible. So, I mean, and there was other things in terms of that management of that organization back then. Now I know they're rebooting it again here in the future. It failed because ultimately, like, the product was just that bad. So it would be very interesting to see, okay, if the NFL goes away and this XFL thing comes back, and also now there's an extreme version of sports, but we are attracted to football as a society in general. Like, that was basically the American pastime is baseball, right? But I think football is what most of us enjoy watching most on Sundays and Monday nights. It's if you make it too safe, like you said, like, who's going to watch two-hand touch or flag football on TV? No one's going to watch that. I mean, people have a hard time watching the Pro Bowl because it's a joke. And then, and football in itself was once upon a time so enjoyable. There's like ESPN would have their top 10 highlights, and they'd always be a major hit, or in NASCAR, a crash. Like, we as a society that consume this stuff, we like that extreme stance. Like, we like it when a car, like, I watch NASCAR. If I do, it's like I watch it for the crashes. Like, I don't watch NASCAR ever, but like, if there's a crash, I might Google it and check it out. But that's like our twisted point of view on sports that is going away, because even there's less crashes in NASCAR, but at least it's more safe. But football, being the biggest sport here, is just the big elephant in the room that I think is going to be the one that really in the next even 5 years is going to be telling in terms of like where this organization goes, because you have a Roger Goodell who makes like $40 million a year or some crazy number like that, controlling this organization in which the players are having a hard time enjoying playing for. You have great players retiring after a year because they fear for their safety, and kids are no longer participating in football. So what if football goes away, then like, what is the next sport in our country that potentially steps in? And that's a great question to even think about too, because basketball is popular, baseball is popular, hockey is like the only organization in the last couple of years to get expansion teams. So it's like, and I'm not a hockey connoisseur myself, but I know people love it. So I don't know, like, what you think.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, and this is taken a little bit outside of the sports world, but just kind of thinking about how, social media and the internet has kind of created such a smaller world in general, and how I think if we're going to take a place of like a NFL, it's going to be something that's more of a global approach. So soccer makes sense. I'm not into soccer.
It's growing.
As a person, I just don't really like to watch I'll watch like the World Cup and I'll watch the Olympics, but that's more from like a national pride type of a situation over watching the product. I think the NBA has done the best job at moving towards a global product. So I would like to probably see the NBA probably take a bigger piece of that. I think soccer's it's the growth there, the numbers are there, that it's just from the youth level and everything, it's just so popular that it's going to become a very much a U.S. popular thing, even though right now maybe it's a second tier level. And I know we're going to probably get some hate from some soccer fans that really think it's, this great thing. But right now, I mean, realistically in the U.S., it's still a second tier sport with hockey and a couple of the other ones. But to me, I think the NBA is doing a really good job positioning themselves globally to be around in the next 25, 50 years. They also are really good at technology. I think like they're really at the front of it with some of like even the virtual reality stuff. You can watch a game courtside, I guess, kind of in a sense with your VR headset where you're sitting courtside watching the game. It's shot in VR, so you can watch it that way. So they're kind of leading, I think, in a lot of ways that some of the other sports are a little bit more cautious on. They're also probably an important thing to know, like with social media and everything, like they're very willing to just like give away all of their digital assets. Like they want people to cut it up and make different highlight films and different, like, because they understand that the more exposure, the better in a digital social type of a sharing world. And I think they do a great job of that. So I think Adam Silver, I think, is running that. I think he maybe has a vision for much longer period of time than some of the other commissioners.
Yeah, NBA is it's one of my favorite sports actually to watch. And I know some people listening to this probably hate it for whatever reason, but it's a superstar-driven sports in which it gathers a lot of eyes. Like LeBron James happens once in a lifetime. Michael Jordan happens once in a lifetime. We had a Kobe Bryant. Like these superstars really drove viewership. And I think when we talk about NBA and we talk about Major League Baseball, and then we look at, say, the NFL, for instance, all three major organizations made major rule changes in the last 3 to 5 years. And I touched on this before, but the only organization that made rule changes in which kind of turned off the consumer was the NFL. The NBA shortened the shot clock on an offensive rebound from 24 to 14 seconds to speed up the game. In terms of baseball, they added basically a countdown in terms of like how long it can be between innings and how many mound visits you get to shorten the game, because that was a gripe from the consumer. I believe hockey made the nets bigger, so that way there'd be more goals and make it more exciting. So the NFL is just making these things, which is the right thing to do. Like what the NFL is doing is probably the right thing to do for player safety. It just doesn't translate to ratings and viewership, which is why my fear there. But you mentioned the NBA being a global brand. Like if you've ever seen an NBA superstar like Dwayne Wade or LeBron or whoever go to China, like they freak out. I mean, it is like they are bigger in China than they are sometimes here in America, and and we mentioned soccer too, and soccer is going to rise. And we got a team here in Minneapolis, and like each game now is sold out. People love it, but I think that the American consumer still kind of consumes the international version of soccer more, like the Premier League, different things like that. They're on TV, like Liverpool and Manchester United and all those big teams. But the NBA is probably going to be the closest thing to, like you said, to basically what soccer is overseas. The NBA is like that here because it translates really well to overseas. So I don't foresee the NBA going anywhere. But they also need to make sure that they keep having superstars because that's what brings eyes to the game. Like I look at Kawhi Leonard, who's in the NBA Finals right now, and when this podcast publishes, it's probably going to publish while the finals are still going on. But he is probably the second best player in the world, right after LeBron James. Maybe third best if you think Steph Curry. But he's not interesting. Like he's got no personality. He's a superstar, but he's not LeBron James superstar. So if the NBA has a bunch of players like Kawhi Leonard, maybe a lot of people aren't going to want to watch. But when you have a superstar with the personality of LeBron James or Steph Curry, or like what Shaq was when he played, like those are what get people drawn into the game. I think they need to keep producing that within that sport. And I would like to see that happen. And I guess baseball had it once upon a time with like your Alex Rodriguez's and things like that. Now you have like your Mike Trouts and you have your Bryce Harpers, which are young, awesome kids. Hockey, I'm sorry, I don't know enough about it, but I'm assuming that hockey's just crazy because they get like 20-year contracts for X amount of dollars. But I think that think of it this way. So people listening to this podcast might know my background came from the pro wrestling world. Now, pro wrestling is a scripted form of entertainment considered sports entertainment, but I think that entertainment aspect that's injected into that sport is what draws people in. So if you can inject entertainment into baseball, into hockey, into basketball, into football, somehow, I think you get more eyes on the sport. Like, let the players in football celebrate in the end zone. For Christ's sakes, don't flag them. Let them have fun. People love that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think with the NBA being that, one, there's not a mask or a helmet that covers up their face, so people know their face. Two, it's only 5 guys on the court other than maybe 11 or 9 or whatever. So you have more of a star kind of influencer type of appeal to the NBA. And I think the NBA also does the best job out of any sports league to let their players be more than sports athletes. They kind of let them speak their mind about things. They let them kind of be about more. And I think that might turn some people off, that especially we're talking about the NFL thing with the current situation with some of them protesting with the national anthem,
Right.
but the NBA is kind of taking a stance where, hey, we want you to be more than that because we know personal brands, if they're done correctly, are going to bring a lot of eyeballs to our game. And I think whoever's running it, if they continue to keep that mindset, they'll probably do extremely well even in the future. And I think like they're probably going to take some elements. Probably, I think soccer and basketball are going to probably align themselves pretty well in terms of how they structure globally. I think that you're going to see the NBA maybe have like some international type of a league where you have these different tiers and different things are going to happen. Same with the so with soccer, I think the MLS turns into some element of like just a global big type of a situation where you have tiered program, and I like that. I like that better than think about it in the NFL. Like if the bottom couple teams dropped off, they had to go play in college or something like so, like whatever
Right.
that is. Like how fun would that be? Because then all the games end up mattering all the time because you don't want to drop down to the lower tier. That lower tier doesn't have TV ads and a bunch of other things that you'd want as ownership. You would want to always go out and get the best people and support the best facilities and whatever. It just kind of it's a meritocracy over you earn that spot and you're never going to be able to give it up other than if the fans just completely stop showing up and then you move the team somewhere.
Yeah, and you brought up a really interesting comment on the NBA being no masks, so the consumers, us, the audience can see what these players look like. Social media also helps them, but the fact in the NBA, one thing that really helps that sport is there's a chance for a player to make a play on every play. Like in the NFL, if you're on offense, you have to sit when the other team's on defense. Hockey is similar to the NBA, but they switch out quite a bit. In the NBA, LeBron James might play for 8 straight minutes, and that 8 minutes, he might get up 20 shots. And that's an opportunity for him to score, become a superstar, make it entertaining, that nonstop action. Because the biggest gripe, at least from a consumer going to a professional sporting event, is the view is not like it is on your 80-inch TV at home, right? So, but at the same time, like the sitting around, the waiting, that's annoying for people. Then you sit in traffic, then you pay all those prices. So that's a conversation for another day in terms of like consuming sports in person versus how we do it. But the NBA, they've always been ahead of the curve. I mean, they came out with like NBA TV, which was a digital streaming service early on. MLB TV did the same thing. They were kind of ahead of the curve while everybody else was relying on digital and cable platforms for their outlets. But I do want to talk about a sport that we talked about earlier on one of our podcasts, and that's the esports. Because it's like, where does that fit into this whole thing? Because Twitch and all these different streaming services have like millions of followers and people who watch all these live streams. Like at some point in the next 25 years, if we live in a digital era and it's going to keep going, it's not going to slow down. Like, is that going to be kind of like a new staple in society that we're going to sit down on TV at Thursday nights at 7 o'clock and watch Josh Shaw versus Ryan Buckeye in Call of Duty on whatever version it's going to be at that point? Like, is that a real possibility?
I think it's a real possibility, and it's already kind of happening at this point. A couple of years ago, I wrote an article around esports, and I made a very bold statement and said that it will be in the Olympics, and people were really laughing at me, and I think they didn't necessarily understand esports and the movement that was happening, but also just maybe where I thought esports was going to go in the future. I think right now, esports is very much somebody is using a joystick or a controller, and they're not in the game. Essentially, they are just playing whatever that game is going on and the rules that are there. Where I think you touched on a little bit with how we're going to consume sports and whatever. It's this idea of like maybe interaction or immersive type of experience or whatever. And I think that's where esports starts to go to, where there's an element of like augmented reality, virtual reality, where like they might not need to be the best athletes in the context of how we describe athletes today, but they're going to need to have athletic elements to play the game the way it's going to be in the future. So esports, at least in my eyes, this is going to be one of those things that is going to shock people how big it becomes. And I think you could see, here's a good example. Did you know that now in college they're giving out scholarships for esports players, like people coming in. There's teams in college, just like football
That's
teams,
crazy.
baseball teams, that kind of thing. Did you
I
know
didn't
that?
know. I had no clue.
Yeah. So you're getting at that. Like there's becoming systems that are getting built out, like proper coaching, proper teams, proper structures to leagues and prize pools, sponsorships. So it's going to take obviously some time for that to all get to the point where it's at other levels. But I think the important thing to note, and why I don't think it's going to be as long as some of these other sports, is that almost every person in this world can be an esports superstar if they really wanted to. There's no really limiting factor in like how maybe strong you are, how tall you are, how there's limits to other sports where if you don't have those attributes, you have no chance to ever be a part of it. It doesn't matter how much you practice, you just odds are you're not going to make it. Where in esports, now there are some elements of hand-eye coordination, reaction times, like gameplay, things that you need to know, but you as like me or you could pick it up maybe in 5 years if we really practice. Like we could be somebody that's making money at the sport. So I think that point alone brings in so many people, and you're going to have so many people that are going to be interested because they feel like I could do that. I could be that person. So that's kind of where my head's at on esports. I know I'm probably a lot more bullish than other people, and I don't even play video games. That's the funny thing about all this is when people talk to me about esports, they're like, wow, you must be like a gamer. And I'm like, no, I'm just really a person that pays attention to trends and pays attention to human behavior. And that's what I see.
What I like about esports, it is the only quote unquote sport that any gender can participate in. In terms of, you think of the NBA, there's the WNBA, that's the women's league. They get money from the NBA. To survive, the WNBA has to take money from the NBA. That's just how it is. And you watch a WNBA game on TV, they're on TV, it's great. It should be on TV, but the audience, the viewership is not near that of what men get. And that's with any professional sports. I think most people just, as a man, whatever, you're faster, stronger. Like, some people might take that the wrong way, but like I'm not trying to be negative about it, but that's the reality of the situation. But with esports, you can be a woman and you can be a man, and virtually like you can participate in the same sport against each other. There's not going to be like a woman esports league versus a male esports league, because there's no like difference in terms of skill set or athleticism between the two that are needed in gaming. You just have to have like basically reaction time, have and be good at whatever the concept of the game is. So I think that is also going to involve women into this, making it more popular, bringing in a whole new slew of people, saying like, I can imagine someday being a man versus a woman in the finals of like the World Cup of e-gaming, and like a ton of people watching that, because you're gonna have the women pulling for the woman and the men just being like whatever. But it's just that's what it can bring, and that's no other sport can do that. You can't get it in the NFL, NHL, NBA, nothing. It just doesn't exist. And so that is a huge potential for esports. Not to mention it's safe. So there are parents who don't want their kids playing video games because they're perceived as lazy and whatnot, but I would love to talk with somebody who told their parents at the age of 12 or 14, like, I don't need to play outside because I'm going to be a professional gamer someday and make a living. And they actually fucking did it. Like, they actually grew up to make a living playing video games. It's absolutely unbelievable. It's interesting you said you think it's going to be the Olympics, because that would be, I'm not saying it's not possible at all, because the Olympics have had some crazy stuff in it. So it's not crazy to think esports could be there. I'm just wondering, like, where we're at now, if the next, it'd be a summer Olympics, winter, it could be either or, like literally either or. But like, do you foresee that happening in the next 12 years? So that'd be basically 3 Olympic cycles.
Yeah, I don't know where the Olympics are being held at. I think it also probably has something to do with that. Like the Olympic thing is also because of esports being so global. Mm-hmm. Like, I think sports to be accepted in the Olympics, the more global they are, the better, because you're going to have so many competing teams. And I think that I know at least lately it seems like a lot of the Asian countries have been hosting or wanting to host Olympics because of the cost and a bunch of things that go on that are limiting to other countries. But if it in 12 years or whatever, if it's somebody in Japan or China or whatever like that, and there's a cycle time that they could get that in there, I would say that it's a pretty good chance that it could be in there now. Might be 20 years or something, but I honestly think it's most people that are going to watch this, it's going to be well before you've passed on in life. You're going to see it and you're going to be like, what the heck is going on here? Why is this happening? But I think it's I mentioned before, I don't know if it's going to be just how we look at it today, with like joysticks and people playing on a screen. They might be some aspect inside the game, some immersive type of an experience where there's an aspect of athletics, but also at like gameplay and team aspect that goes along with it. Um, I don't know, but I definitely think it's going to be the Olympics. I'd like to see it earlier than not, just to kind of freak people out.
Yeah, I
So
mean, and plus,
because I think it'll open people's eyes.
You want to be
like,
right.
People are
Josh.
lost.
You want to be right. Let's not kid ourselves. You want to be right and say, "Ha! I told you this is going to happen." I mean, that's good for you. It's good for your brand.
Before I check out of social media, I want it to be one of those things where I could go point to it, pull one of those flashback videos up from 10 years ago and be like, look at this.
I want to, like, as we, over the next 10 minutes or so here, talk about, we're talking about sports and how they might change in the next 10, 15, 20 years. One thing that I'm super interested in that I think probably will happen, and we've talked about this a little bit, they've done this a little bit in terms of like adjusting the time clock and adjusting the time of game, because our attention spans as society are like nothing. I mean, we are constantly glued to our phones. We need to be doing something at all times. So you take like a Major League Baseball game, which is 9 innings long, 3 outs per side. So you have 6 outs per inning, 54 outs in that game. Did I do that right? Yeah. Does an organization like Major League Baseball, probably the most traditional of all sporting organizations in America, do they ever look and say, maybe it's best we go to 7 innings, or maybe it's best that we reduce from 3 outs to 2 outs, because we need to shorten the game to get more people to watch the game of baseball again? I think it's crazy to think about, but in 25 years, if our attention spans and we're not filling the stadiums, they legitimately might have to make a decision to say, let's shorten this from 9 innings to 7 innings because we need to get people in the seats.
Yeah, I mean, I think any sport like baseball, like golf, like these ones that are very slow to change, very historic in the way that they were kind of established, and they want to make sure that they stay true and authentic to that. I think they struggle big time. I just think that you have to evolve and change with what's happening in this world. If it's digital, if it's short attention spans, if it's whatever, I don't like people to chase those, but it's also, you can't just sit back and wait for it to come maybe the opposite direction. Eventually people are going to want to come back to this simpler time. And it's like, I don't think that's ever going to happen. So for me, I mean, baseball, if I'm going to pick one sport that I like to watch the most, it is baseball, especially like in person. Just the sights, the sounds, the smells, the especially watching it over on TV, because you could see the positioning of the players and you could see what's happening. And I think that's probably because I played, you put, like, I think we look at the game a little bit differently, but as a business person, I think they're going to have trouble. I think they're already having trouble, and I think they're going to continue to have trouble because they are stuck in the past. They just won't change, even though you could see they're slowly getting like a little bit. Maybe they're trying to warm up to it and
like
see,
replays as recent as like 3 years ago. So I mean, that took forever to get them to have that too.
Yeah, it's like things like, I mean, at this point, even this is kind of like a shocking, weird thing to think about, like taking the umpires out of the game, like especially like the home umpire. Like you already have every element available to be able to just do a digital strike zone that's consistent 100% of the time. You know what I mean? There's no element of like that goes in there. There's things like that. There's things that go into me that is, like you said, like speed of the game, just kind of things that need to just pick up the pace. I don't know that people are interested. I know that I've went to a lot of baseball games in my life with friends, girlfriends, things like that, and barely anybody that I've ever went to has actually watched the game at all, really. You know what I mean? They're just like, and that's how people are with baseball at this point. So they have a lot of catching up to do to get people interested in the game. It's also like just super long season, 162 games. Like the games don't matter. You know what I mean? Like they don't matter as much as, and I'm not saying you advocate good out of like a 20 game season, but like cut it down. Like 162 is a lot of games.
Yeah, no, I mean, that was going to talk about that too, because even the length of the NBA and NHL is 82 games, and then you have the NBA playoffs, which is like another 82 games. It's just a long season that it's hard to have people invest. So I think that right there will be one of the first things to change, whether it be the length of seasons, length of games. In the NBA, it could be going back to what they do in college, 2 20-minute halves. Now, I understand why they have 4 quarters in the NBA. It's an advertising play, right? Like, you have X amount of timeouts per quarter, which every timeout you can have advertisers on TV. After every quarter break, there's advertising, etc. I understand that. But if you're going to have people walk away from the game because it's too long, then the advertising is not going to much matter. So you have to keep people interested. So I could see the NBA, for instance, the shot clock's fine where it's at, but going to 2 20-minute halves. That takes 8 minutes off a game. I could see the Major League Baseball doing kind of the soccer thing and allowing games to end in a tie in the regular season, because some of these games too will go 15, 16, 17 innings. That's like a double game. That's crazy. Nobody watches that. I can't foresee the Major League Baseball ever going from 3 outs to 2, because I would actually be very upset with that as a baseball fan. But I could see a reduction in innings. I could potentially see that, but more so a reduction in length of season, because it is, and like you mentioned, like outside of opening weekend and then maybe like your rivalry games, it's kind of just there. I mean, if you go to a game, you're not watching it, you're going to drink beers with your friends and kind of hang out. And that's fine. I mean, baseball still, the attendance on some of these stadiums are still really good. But I think as our kids, or we have kids and they grow up, if we don't have them watch these games with us, they're not going to be as interested in it. Like, I'm interested in baseball because I played, I watched it on TV, I watched my favorite superstars as a kid on TV, but I feel like our parents now today aren't putting as much value in sports maybe as they once did. And it's more so other things like, I don't know, maybe it's coding or what, which is not bad. But I'm just saying, like, that's going to change dramatically when these kids get older and pursue sports, how we watch, how we play, and how that game is conducted.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked, I think, a lot about the aspects inside, like the sport, like changing some things within the sport to make it more appealing to the audience or the consumer. Because I think the ones that stick around are the ones that can keep the revenue the highest for the longest period of time, because it comes with advertising. So I know this is probably a discussion for a whole other day, but the idea of like who's going to be able to make the quickest changes to become like it more immersive, or something that's going to like completely shock you. I mean, like if you're able to watch it as like a 1P over like a 3P, like in the sense of like, say I'm a fan of Tom Brady, and I can actually watch the game as Tom Brady's playing it. Like when he's quarterbacking, I can see where his eyes are at. I can see what he's like. That brings in a whole different element of like you being involved in the game, and then that brings in so much other things. So like even like baseball, I mean, the element of baseball where I think people don't understand is like how difficult it is, like from hitting a ground ball with a round bat. Like you might have some element of being able to like be involved in that a little bit, and then it gives a greater appreciation, gives you more of a connectability to it, and then you're maybe that changes the trajectory of baseball or any of these sports. I think it's who can maybe be on brand with technology and be able to like be first and be really leaning in on it. And I think that one could potentially be the one that's like the biggest. It doesn't matter if we think, that NFL is turning into a sissy sport. I think the technology layer might take everything up to a new level.
Great point. I'm just when you said that, I was just thinking like how cool to be to throw on the virtual reality goggles and be the left fielder and watch the ball and like watch what he sees. Or be the pitcher, or be a baseball player, the hitter. It's interesting too because the overhead cam in the NFL did not exist until the XFL. It came from that, but that like changed how we consumed NFL because you were now in the huddles and you were over the top of the quarterback. So that's a great point. I mean, I think if they just make the product more consumable in a beneficial way for a consumer to make sure that they're invested into that game, it is going to help the longevity of that sport. And it's going to be super interesting to see how things because 10 years ago, you and I would have sat down and said, well, I don't think the NFL is going to be around in 30 years. That would never came up. I mean, it was hot. It was at the highest, and so many people were watching it. But, then the concussion cases stuff happened, and it just changed that entire aspect of how we consume football. And then, obviously, the stuff outside the sport that turns certain people off. But I would love to hear what the listeners think on this, too, because I made a claim saying that the NFL is not going to be around in 25 years. So I'm probably going to get my head bit off by a bunch of people, and you made a claim that you wrote an article a couple years ago that esports is going to be in the Olympics. So, those are two big, bold claims that we made here on the podcast. And if you guys are listening to this on iTunes, Spotify, watching via YouTube. You can converse with us on YouTube. We do a great job there of getting back to people. Facebook page, Two Guys, One Shaker Cup on Facebook. But we love to hear feedback and converse where we can. And if you want to debate us, Josh is great at getting involved in debates. So I let him take most of those. But it's a place for you guys and girls to provide your comments and feedback to what you heard on the show today. And we're more than happy to jump in there and converse back and forth with each and every single one of you.
Definitely appreciate it, guys. We'd also like if you guys have any suggestions for new episodes. I know that me and Ryan are pretty creative guys, and we come up with these all on our own, believe it or not. But if you guys do have some things that you'd like us to cover, we would love to kind of do that, especially if it's something we think is going to be interesting to a lot of people.
Yeah, man, absolutely. So go ahead and hit that. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button on iTunes or Spotify, or subscribe to our YouTube channel. Write us a review as well. Helps out the algorithm so more people can discover the Two Guys, One Shaker Cup podcast. Until next week, I'm Ryan Bucks. That's Joshua Shaw. Y'all have yourself a wonderful day.